Because did we,
Thanks, Russell.
Sure.
we're gonna,
A little slip up.
see what they want to do this year tomorrow.
Russell.
We have a reservation.
Good job, Russell.
I think.
I'm in one at Foster, yeah.
Well, it's like,
I like it.
it's, well, so for me, it's like a fancy noodles company. That's what I
Oh.
describe
They
it
have craft
as
beer.
recently. I wonder how far that is.
Was yours expired? Did it taste, cause
It didn't taste great. I'm
Okay,
gonna
yeah,
be
so I
honest and
tried
say
it.
It wasn't
it
great.
did taste like Diet Coke flavored with broth.
Oh, no, but I was in such need of it and
Yeah, I'm gonna pour this one out, but
bruh.
the mini ones, have not
The
expired.
mini ones are good, yeah.
Not a lot of Diet Coke drinkers around here.
Yeah.
It would not sit at the fridge at my school.
No, I can't.
Not last a week.
Oh, shoot, it's that time.
It's like-
Okay.
It's since, so.
9 minutes, there's a subway there.
Dude, it's not
Wait, I got, give me a second.
Yeah.
There are cups of nuts down the hall.
Well, here's the thing. We'll do what I say. But only if I'm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see if,
So that you can use your phone to stream.
That's one while we're rolling.
Thank you.
I like it a lot, so.
Oh, I can watch it. Where are you gonna watch?
You get one there?
Where are you watching?
You good, Chris? Rosie, you good? Awesome. Anyone not ready? Advantage one is adaptation. First federal pursuit of CCS is inevitable, but only the plan can ensure global development by facilitating effective U.S. leadership, sustainable management, drives motivation, and commercial viability. Stages it out. 18 CDR technical decarbonization and no implemented commercial scale CDR tech like confidence no countries implemented the U.S. able to lead science and engineering suitable as for demonstration and early development in White House. Affirmative R&D agendas are still being defined. Ladies in particular coordination activities at the Fed level motivate prioritization and current schemes, squandered water supply and hamper investment, which locks in runaway warming. Stencil it out. 21 water management, moderated environments, same motions in indicating strong reduction of water sources, accompanied by sustainable freshwater use, code aggravation, challenges including investment in water management, implementation, and resulting in the USA where bioenergy plantations increase the water density in comparison to climate scenario various large scale displays, the deployment of production of challenges to freshwater due to water, the reduction of productivity making the difference between 1.5 and 2 highways and need to include water and mitigation features, changes about to which force check appear management offers to just way out of the deployment required stringent implementation while investments help achieve SDGs entail side effects holistic analysis required and warming is approaching irreversible tipping point. Scaling up CCS and first catastrophe McGrath 21 activity changing climate irreversible waste temperature broken into decades science and say act fast we can never catastrophe don't have to like that get worse for every bit of warming and 1.5C will be reached by 2040 the information starts in the next few years if we cut emissions by half by 2030 we can reverse temps to net zero also reducing emissions using clean tech and then varying releases using CCS net zero should reverse temperature increase minimize likelihood of hitting tipping points a year not doomed in those tipping points temperature amplifying feedbacks that overcome their defense or 20 water vapor feedbacks release carbon increase warming future result from reflectivity ices melting sunlight and sunlight space and warming underneath this loss perspective so for the warming melting Arctic permafrost contains twice as much carbon as all emissions so far the methane I said containing twice as much carbon as we have emitted leading to warming amount we will emit by 2100 twice as what we have emitted remaining fossil fuel gives the potential to burn 8 times as much and meeting Paris obligations of first extinction years 21 and climate accidental hot sunday while it is adaptation 12 degrees would leave the one who for half habitation, indoor defects included disasters, pressures on water and food, viruses, and migration, societies that link to climate positive impacts of lucid, illegal irreversible runaway change, threshold existed at 2 degrees A in Paris, keep below existential air athletic impact goes wriggle. 21, never experienced cognitive react cognitive think about stranger, not just skills, additional psychology, also time we discuss the future, for future is worthless, the climate morphed into crisis experience record. I smelled unprecedented fires and flood deaths, Earth is facing emergency. Earth makes it beyond capital one. Paris commitments require backs, but water stress jeopardizes that pathway. Since out 21 backs irrigation biomass, water stress warns of evacuation by biomass warming, limited to 1.5 resources, water stress and exceed climate climate is to achieve without jeopardizing SDGs challenges and solutions are completely requiring trade-offs to be resolved. Pledge not enough to warming in Paris requiring backs, and the biomass provide electricity. Electric energy fuels and employed at large scale early and contrasted to work with the many biomass increase competition for scarce water resources. If tried act for backs Pierce 19 remove CO2 remove carbon by air capture return areas to absorb biomass fuel emissions at 0 with SCCS emissions at negative the IPCC said be keeping below to require widespread backs and is proven emissions that less carbon effectively percent ecosystems over to 0 emissions economy fits the definition of geoengineering the case is compelling there 7 million forest win and pay off of geoengineering and we want to get feedback so the biosphere and natural regulation and climate change estimates global inequality the whole 14. And it's not carcinogenic mentality or urgency of climate change cannot be overstated. Industrialization, market, presenting our greenhouse gases, reliance on fuels, support the consumption habits of the wealthy least, poor people are most high, climate change is the least responsible for climate change, also development, inequality, accessories, inequality, climate risk questions about injustice, with which any critique must be concerned with. We cannot overlook what it means to be responsible for the future's present action and inaction, and bring harms that are already disproportionately experienced by women, people of color, and disabled, and poor people. And developed nations like the U.S. have an ethical responsibility to respond to climate change fight. 18 and adaptation should be considered alongside mitigation and adaptation is an ethical issue and is especially in temporally diffuse and cause and effect climate involves intergenerational ethical challenges and challenges that climate presents the vision and culpability and vulnerability and so we felt like vulnerable communities globally stuff that do not have the capabilities of adaptation and present tools are ineffectual and human environmental and intergenerational good are threatened by climate meeting cost of adaptation is represented just as degree decrease in that warming can be common development and adaptation and prioritize warming. New tech means nuclear warming remains controlled and contained and non-escalatory. Lieber and Press 17 took away at an accuracy navigation and guidance precisely guided the delivery. And throughout it, through the nuclear age target design had reliant ground drawback debris something into the fireball where they spread radiation. These effects can be minimized. Weapons detonated at high altitude greatly reduce fallout. Low yield weapons could do the job above the fall of the threshold. The accuracies to the point the low causality strikes are possible. The traditional millions of fatalities. The low yield often would produce massive fewer comparable to losses from individual operations. Fallout corresponding radiation levels acceptable by ocean. Robust regardless of which way wind blows. And they transact together create transparency. Sometimes the delivery systems appear to be reducing survivability and warming vastly ways even large scale nuclear war. Stevenson 17 to considerably low effects of all nuclear war. We're going to launch a sizable fraction of the full Russian and NATO arsenal that we would expect a reasonably faster recovery. This would be aided by elevated levels of carbon dioxide plans. Life would recover strongly. What about humanity? Would it survive the direct death? Would hover around one? The real killer would be the prolonged cold. Some population will surviving. Population to a few thousand. However, this may be a little overly pessimistic. Humans survive the ice ages where conditions were comparable to nuclear winter tracks. Many are could cling along the coastlines of humanity could cling on long enough for the biosphere to recover. Populations could diversify into species of humans might emerge longer term, and the planet would likely benefit in either way. Climate change escalates into every nuclear hotspot player. 20 climate temperatures, pitching millions into crowded cities where pandemic strike increases since offset, fighting over resources of a nuclear war erupting near the Pacific, and thus the plan the United States federal government should substantially increase its protection of water resources in the United States by implementing an adaptive management regime in accordance with and support of.
I'll get to you in a second.
Okay, that's not the plan text. The current agenda fails without intersector coherence and integrating water into SDGs, but the plan also adopting an adaptive management regime under the SDGs. Smith and Matthews 19 SDGs Copenhagen strategies Paris large agreement on water climate mitigation and adaptation and resilient management ensure coherence ensure coherence among SDGs and less coherence is considered there's a common among sectors integration of water climate water though national level strength and coherence among sectors given the influence of co-energy cities agriculture disaster management failed to integrate water into climate improvement conflict over allocations to limit green growth. And thus the plan, this is the one, the United States federal government should substantially increase the protection of water resources in the United States by adapting water law in accordance with and support of the Sustainable Development Goals. Back on salt. Integrated water management is the only avenue to efficient water use. Article 14 is that the water law characterizes share with flexible standards and integrated governance. The features that can with the water law systems of ML features. Competition water demand supply and dynamics cannot be avoided. The rules of sharing mechanisms they can enhance enough capacity and share systems are necessary to integrated functions that water provides. The rules do not secure certainty well encompass systems that adapt to regime reduce unnecessary risk. One element is to reduce the use of property or property rights. Private property rights can be enough if they're flexible region. Property rights are polluted due to changing conditions. Multi-participant watershed governance. Physical risk sharing included shared reduction of water use system, transport restoration, pollution and production efforts, and adaptive framework use conditional standards. Decision makers need authority. An adaptive regime does not embrace standardless discretion. Instead, adaptive law requires decisions are adapted. Permitting agencies make adjustments as required. Asher's sitting up on the context.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay. What does the plan do?
The plan creates an adaptive management regime that's outlined in the normal evidence that manages water using shared risk portfolios and other ways that we're able to change the way that we manage water and increase protection through that.
Wait, okay, so does it make, so the adaptive model changes how companies use water when it comes to seasons? Yes.
It has the government regulate companies in different ways through, and they use like ways to determine how they're going to regulate this.
What regulations are those?
Yeah, the article evidence describes 3 problems with water law right now. First is that there is not shared risk among stakeholders. So climate change is obviously changing our water resources drastically, but the rules don't change. They still are like set numbers of water that's allowed to be withdrawn by different companies. The article evidence says that we need to change that. The second argument is that there need to be like flexible standards and property rights. That is like who owns the water that adapts to those changing. And the last argument is that uses conditional standards.
Okay, and that aligns us with SDGs?
So the important part about it is that certain nice evidence is that when we do that in the context of SDGs, which is what the plan text says, is that would allow the deployment.
Okay, so you Frankenstein a card about SDGs and then a card about protecting
No.
water.
The Smith and Matthews card is our solvency advocate. It says we need to implement an adaptive water law regime. The article evidence is describing exactly what that would look like.
Okay, I guess.
We didn't Frankenstein any cards.
Okay,
These
yeah,
cards
sure.
are explicit about what we
Who's
need.
the agent of the plan?
The United States federal government.
Like, is it like the courts, Congress?
We like the United States federal government.
Okay, great. I guess I'm a little confused. Your evidence seems to identify that CCS is not scalable in any country, including the US. I guess is US CCS enough, or do you need to want to spill over?
So the Pierce card makes the argument about how we have 7 million acres of forest that we're able to use, but we aren't able to use it right now because we don't have the water supply to support that biomass, which means we have to we have to regulate the way we use water and like regulate the use of water so that we have the water for that.
Wait, so the plan regulates water and something else so it can be used for CCS?
No.
Wait, explain this again then. I don't understand.
It changes the way that we manage water. In
Okay,
something else, what do you mean in something
I got
else?
it. The United States federal government implements an adaptive water law regime to ensure that there are not intersectoral conflicts that would disrupt our ability to deploy bioenergy and carbon capture and sequestration.
Okay, so you change water law so other industries do not come into conflict with CCS?
Yes.
Okay,
So there's
well,
and
that
so
seems-
CCS is
well,
coming to conflict.
that seems antithetical to the topic of the CCS. Would you use water?
We increase the protection of water because we use it for like we don't
So,
cause like adverse impacts on it.
but you use that water for something else.
Well, no, the Arnold card talks about how the way that we manage water, like who gets the
Okay,
water,
we're
affects
going-
how we
We're going,
harm that water.
we're going in circles. The inequality card, why did you add this card?
Because we think that climate change cements global inequality, and that's probably bad.
10 minutes, yeah.
Joe Drive, Rosie.
Oh, yeah.
What the hell is that?
It's only about 5 hours. It's just a really boring.
9:34.
Yeah.
It's about 5 hours. It's like a much faster ride.
Mhm. Mhm.
Actually, 9:34. Out of the like 13 or whatever SDGs, what SDGs would you all defend?
That's
all of them.
That's a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
All of them?
That's a misunderstanding of what we
Okay.
have. Though. does.
Okay, 9:23.
Just to be clear,
Okay, is Senate?
we don't change it.
Will be 6, then the evening. Gene answered. Yep. Okay. First off is the K, federal water management, it compromises water as a resource that facilitates indigenous dispossession through physical, epistemic, and ontological violence. Wilson, in 19, governance has composed for indigenous water management resources until state physical, epistemic, and ontological violence. They seek to dispossess indigenous people, water resources that be known and exploited, and ignores socio-cultural, political regulations of water governing agencies, processing, colonial dispossession, and reject the assets extinction reps. They are subject to voyeurism, rape, abuse, colonialism, and race ongoing violence. Throughout Mitchell 20, major separation in the world is the one who's doing for effect, and complete the whole narratives about life and death by releasing my church that being so violence, these are not just colonial wars, these are conflict, destructions become popular, the images produce affect real period, they see a being of this rise and no questions, reformation, the drug extinction, the nationalists, inequalities, extinction narratives, obscure colonial nature, phenomena, activity of white, authors regarding apocalypse and fascist images, stories and precludes for survivance through which communities coexist in the face of violence, apocalyptic narratives, mass perversion, self-sustaining violence, to prevent violence, extinction, and nurture all concepts that tend to who what is biggest to recognize the capacity of life, their words resist the words for violence, and respect for traditions on erasure, and the one you see embarks on a death drive to heaven, insisting that they free the body of its indelible markings. The master's cloak of meaning, fashion of dead narrative skin gives rise to politics itself as a mode of being young in 17 second analytic critique property of our splits causes the whole intensive the political political person as epistemological unit. The death drive as well as begin to locate the child with their futurity on which is eliminated whiteness. The drive indicates attention boarding psychic libidinal relation to white what's the drive that harnesses libidinal energy that's exhausted in the Indian physical schools before education shots to enter language body should mark abject a child attack of death. But being the word is not deliberate practice, the child is environment whose name the political model itself outside of political thought and temporality. The figure child is a white child, and the children in city to subjectivity overexposed to the political and overturned by law and circularity of misrepresentation relationship with the death is sutured like next is something that's social indigenous person is imagined as always already outside history, extinct control of the world, and neoliberal political thought, and the alternatives to decolonize water, which solves both in the 19 we can engage in understand what is not as what as those separate from politics, culture, and economy. Water should be decolonized, such as passive justice, and move towards sustainable water conversations open geographies of water, contrasting with narrow man-made perspective on how to better govern water, also how to govern ethics, arrangements, histories, and systems. Next off is the counterplay in the United States federal government should substantially increase its investment in use of protected competition sequestration and establish a program to cover 4.8% of the resources of the Earth's oceans and more than 1.1 likelihood of diameter particles. They engage conventional stable diesel system that is connected in salt water. The first plank solves warming, interested 10 pure prototype, picture warming, exposed prototype reacts complex in the air, 100,000 tons each year, small in the drilling to prototype, can processed by 100,000 times USGS. Study report that countries codes contain enough prototype to soak up more than 500 years worth of emissions, and segment also self-warming. Morgan 11 latest particles are dissolved by back scattering from very small particles is 40%, and the increase in alpha by 25 translates to an increase of the by 0.31, 4.8% of one of their oxygen currents. CO2 forcing would cost $2 billion, significantly cheaper. It doesn't really require exotic engineering. Next off is the BISCON decided businesses are confident now. Dwight 121, 2 CEOs is on C-Sunshine on the rise, and 175 CEOs representing 115 industries may not also see strong growth over the next year. Public traction crashes business confidence and the entire economy. Barking the 19 business reaction got faster short-term increase lower confidence that is high companies buys technical views cutting costs feel fear prevent investments even if it's more transport frustrated with polarization and uncertainty about regulation. The dark confidence that lower investment and employment quickly talk ourselves into a recession and American economic growth prevents U.S.-China war, baby keeps spreading technology and bolsters international cooperation. Brewers in 16 multi-let system proves on a strong U.S.-China never delivered lockdown, but it can turn us the U.S. visibility trigger. It doesn't see crisis for the party. Lower growth make it harder for liberalization plan for a war that will not have the West as the powerhouse. Bring over something contest of U.S. China and Russia. New Cold War wars not inevitable. As we're going to take a combined lack of global warming could be dangerous. There's no government without the U.S. leadership. Geoengineering drones that bio nanotube without rules risk catastrophe. Next off is T resolve. Resolve must be inserted in dictionary. No day from a purpose or time determined, and D before use of D requires specification blends 85. D is a word of specificity and contrast to and which encompasses the class. That means the plan must enumerate its actor as one of the three branches. Matheson 21 Constitution divide the powers of federal government into 3 defined categories: both state, executive, and judicial. Increase requires specification of protection. OED 89 increase compared to specified quality. They violate the specified agent or no specified action put egg for people loans and ground, big plan text and crossing answers. Big data is impossible, obvious kind of competition, fixed and mechanism based decisions causes conditionality, which we're bringing towards after to see clarification. Next off is the emission decide. Stringent emissions restrictions for fears of loss competitiveness that causes adoption of a carbon border territorial offset impact on the industry. Collapse of global trade and turns warming cruiser 21 plus makers come out of the policy theory where the Peter wants it. But domestic industries that disadvantage carbon adjustment period way out by adding territory ports and places not to recover price. Significant impede deployment of innovations that cut emissions, calculating carbon content be difficult leading to government the gaming CBM to run of our WTO rules under my pairs, increasing mistrust CBM would deter the drive from innovation by bifurcated global economy, limited fusion innovations that cut emissions reduce incentive to make them. CBM are incompatible with WTO rules, and the CBM is something negative. Negotiate the burden, compliance of compliance with trade solutions that are weakening developing countries, promote challenge based differential treatment countries, facilitate unilaterally or multilaterally. Treaty wars could be solved from beyond 6 or conference as nations rise up tariffs on wide types of products. Global protectionism caused extinction through world wars and collapse response to external risks of environmental events, health tech failures, both with final future structural forces impact capacity of power system of the produce, increasing polarization and carbon weaken institutions to reduce capacity to confront warming, tech change, nuclear weapons, and escalating trade disputes will end globalization. Everyone, separating Texas saving most responsible for this. The global effects will be damaging a 2000, which contributes to conflict. Trade wars lead to World War III economic countries under aggression and eroding trade wars. By reducing interdependence, we made that conceivable. The current moment is greater than pre-1914. There are many hotspots, Korea, SES, Taiwan, where it seems dry. The case page. Six stop. Protection entails stopping external threats to water, regulating sources of pollution. Not only AAT protection is broader in relation to preservation, it includes reduction of pesticides, pollutants, which include water construction vessels. Violation, they regulate the use of water, not the pollution of water. Go neg, they expose limits and deck ground because there are infinite uses of water that we don't have case next to the case page. All their about global CSS, which they don't solve, but they solve for US. What do they integrate? How does the law change? Do evidence describe the scalability of the plan on how to solve CCS and COVID and structural factors make it international SDG success impossible to rise in 21 ECG. And those who do the coronavirus obviously critical failure results sometimes target we're going to create only 3 to achieve. It's about outcome team model for COVID testing, COVID achieving SDGs that impossible. Moreover, goals more difficult than direct between 50 and 20 countries reduce gap with 10%. That's 50 years when it must be within 15 negative. Economy says designing policy out of touch difficulty for SDG not result is going to get shift in inequalities and polarization and subsidization fails. And global adoption is implausible. It hasn't been at all 18 a Europe is filtered. Both CCS study with problem time is needed. Europe should diverse in the conflict of funding and combination with renewables resulting in progress. I see global is like assume seconds and wants it. And their costs are achieving that objective either. Or CCS that's not great. CCS more expensive than the undertaking, and CCS takes decades to scale up. Has it 18? Living 1.5 degrees Celsius, that's time scale 20 years in that. Not beyond pilot, you're lucky action to be created. CCS and knowledge keep construction 40 years. Concept of public large tech take decades. We mentioned test with pilot and deal operation and rapid rates to achieve materiality and all causes other emissions. That's from Kumar et al. 21 multitude. That table and climate change block extinction occur at all 19. There's debate basis to convert to Newton. Research we mean article to make it a good machine models excellent things from model effect. We go beyond passing model from a scientific perspective. There's like personal speculation, like conclusion for evidence. Impact of climate does not cause conflict. Jackson 20 change of climate are long and uncertain increases every step does not. Limited climate conflict effects can be alleviated without application can construct an argument entirely. Economic conflict to go through or reference research, optimists emphasize innovation, there's adaptation and increased use of technology for purpose. With a warm system, CCC less corporations off the hook the more because it's a 20 capital cash by profit and keep more of company capture CO2 and some objective to help produce more oil. What's that card that produce more? Produce more. Okay.
Who decolonizes water in the world of the alternative?
I guess there are a few answers that way. First is that many arguments that decolonizing water and decolonizing frames of the resolution are necessary, especially in educational spaces.
Who does that?
Us, when the judge votes neg, I guess analyzing the resolution.
Do you endorse, do you feel that other people do that?
Well, the two will make arguments of how decolonizing water will look like grassroots movements that have protested bad uses of the environment. Indigenous tribes have different
Do
views
you
of
feel
water.
those movements?
I don't know what you mean by fiat. Can you imagine a
Wait,
world?
imagine it, Steve.
Okay, see, the, carbon tariff is said, what is the link to the plan?
Like carbon reduction restrictions, regulation on environmental things.
Wait, so any environmental regulations?
It's specific to like warming emissions.
We'll make arguments, things like
Because we talk
aligning,
about.
things like aligning with Paris, SDG, we'll make a spillover claim from aligning with SDGs broadly.
There's an entire SDG about the climate.
Okay, that's fine. The T vagueness, how much do we have to specify what the plan does?
The exact protection measures that get taken.
So we have to specify like this company gets regulated, this company gets regulated?
Yeah, and what and how so.
Okay, so we have to spend like the whole 1AC explaining that, or when are we supposed to explain that?
I mean, it should be relatively easy. Like
To
fracking.
say every
fracking-
single company that the plan regulates.
You don't have to name every company, but what specific thing is no longer allowed with this plan? What's
So
the
it has to,
mandate?
so you can only regulate one thing, is what you're saying.
What specific things? I guess you can do multiple things.
So we have to say every single person, every single
No,
thing.
no,
that's
not
regulated.
person. What mandates the app?
What
What's
if we
on
regulate
companies?
individual people?
Okay, then what you do to those people?
We understand MBA plans are always vague. This argument is that you should
That's
select reactors.
Okay,
I expect what the
for
plan
team
does.
protection, why, like this says like a bunch of things, like what that protection is. Why is it just regulating sources of pollution?
It's preventing pollution. It says above, it defines protection in terms of preservation of the water. The use of the water does not harm the water, it's the pollution of it that does. So you have protection of the water.
Okay, sure, that's fine.
You change how it's used.
Let's go back to the K. Actually, no. Yeah, let's talk about BizCon. Businesses are confident, 121. Ukraine, our business is still confident.
When you make new arts, we'll respond. But as of now, we have the most recent ad that says owners and CEOs are optimistic about the way the economy is trending.
That's fine. The Burroughs card, why does like a strong economy solve that war?
When the U.S. can lead, it can foster international cooperation over a global alliance system. It can prevent provisionist actors from trying to overtake that
I mean, why?
to cap. So in terms of conflict or in terms of like other things like
Why can it prevent provisionist actors?
when there's a strong global U.S. alliance system, there's an incentive not to escalate because they know that the U.S. will overpower. Sort of like a hedge.
Please.
Are you sure? All right, stop her 616.
We didn't know how much pepper we had, I'm pretty sure we were like 931. I think that sounds right.
924.
Okay, that's good one. James, can you write that down? Zach and I are, I got it.
931.
Oh, you're looking at another board.
I got it. Just like, we got it.
Okay.
We just like never keep track of it. It's terrible.
Okay, hold on. Hold on. No, I'll send this. No, the order. It's the order is the advantage. T protection. The T specification, don't know how you label that. The K, the advantage kind of plan. The business confidence disad, and the carbon tariff disad. Okay, is anyone already? All right. Climate outweighs first of all obligation. Warming leads to violence against the global south, search device globally. Two, cognitive bias, bias against climate impacts, improve on brain scans. That's working on 3, so nuclear war, position strikes, and nuclear technology, limit radiation, calcium, 4, prefer models of the worst day. Those cause 1 billion deaths, which comes to nowhere close to warming areas. It means we outweighs all their impacts global. The plan facilitates global transition to vaccine. When it first started, when he says that the U.S. doing it would create a model and show the rest of the world how it can be deployed, which allows that to be done better. The second no specification argument will be answered on the T page. The SDG success is not relevant to ask success because it's particular about how we deploy SDGs to so transition to vaccine. Scalability argument. First of all, that the plan solves by making it more scalable by providing enough water to ensure that it's possible. But this part is about CCS broadly arguments about the specific mode of vaccine. But I officially want to mention solves all the effects of specific vaccine. Watch out, 14 part that policies restrict water use of biology to disable levels of implementation programs. Which would allow irrigation by energy burning definitely order so double negative impacts on water. Energy can prevent water irrigation contribution reducing land impacts. The all causes the CCS allows us to suck those all causes out of the atmosphere, which means we resolve that question. Yes, climate change causes extinction. Collapses biospheres by creating a 1-2 punch whereby natural resilience is undermined. That means there's literally no way for us left because we rely on nature to sustain ourselves. But the second thing is that it magnifies all of the risks like war and it makes the world so hot that we can't live in it. There's no adaptation because it happens too quickly and planets necessary to sufficient adaptation. But yes, there's conflict over refugees, spillovers, put pressure, but really the state collapse, which was war. The CCS smooth transition long-term solutions keep all team. Vaccine promising based on tech ready this concept with the short negative emissions are attracted. They smooth the short-term transition. The long-term deployment is only long-term CCS can bring down the bioenergy stuff solves this moral hazard argument because it allows us to replace fossil fuels in the market for bioenergy. But I'll concede that this moral hazard could happen, which means that the counterplan does not solve the act. T protection. We meet one planet, they flash across the scroll, just as position competition, we're based on resolution 3, 2 functional planet stops, not pumping transfers down, 3 context, 15, 6.6 context, water cancer protection, includes preventing damage, preserving ecosystems, energy sustainable, use protection, pollution, validating. Liquidation around us, water, preventing damage, preserving water coating, use sustainable use of the base long term, combination of available water, associated with pollution, insurance, supply, preferred water, ground only management outside of clear from Q1.8. People agree over management is desirable across the country will result by public safety for the pedestrian elimination of the core. Speed of water will result by common states of management and water within defend difference not constitutional as fed as the law board role management in this constitution water superficially only or all those collective agreement of protection. This cherry pick makes debates arbitrary excuse for influence that way in there to plus or after 3 grounds to stand. Management magnifies the settlings for regulations of seats businesses for other words check 5 reasons functional list advantage just like seats see multiple misconduct are making strategies feasibility is good. This do not specification we meet the use of G is
this specific, but these are the reasons what we have to specify there. Descriptors of words already in the resolution and the plan text. We specify the quantities, all water resources in the U.S. are listed as the three things the app does, which you can read. I can't repeat the card here. Specifying anything else is infinitely regressive, but vagueness gives you more links, which means there's office and usage user agent specifications, no relation based. That's unpredictable, arbitrary, at least bad agent can price the decentral research to fall. Second. One frame rule, when the plus variations get better alternative, their explanation with the apparatus, the only effect in inferior class makes critical research usuals, and they're arguing in bad faith, proven by the inclusion of this called the one and teachers are often super good. The old everyone's like sort can't solve firm to the app and decolonize water and all other instances. The three, the old kind of solve doesn't, and what the machine, four extinction that ways, blade side, zero pressure will exclude any alternative in all life, including K. But social science, as for climate change, also outweighs finding the impact in the broader region. It's also not exclusive water, can have values as a resource and intrinsically it's a link of emission at best. Though popular price on one links to indicate impact is also popular prioritization. 2 points would be one case of your asset impact is unethical arts extinction impact is real balance scheme. I explore this with reference to earlier treatments of extinction match features which are suddenly going to be washed away and the cell will more price and liberally the subjectivity biological hands can be found waiting. However, the cell is which power cell is broken and control of the land reverse to next indigenous contaminant. So the conscious thought is myth for actual science for contributing brain as machine thought proceeds one step at a time. The English style working in the background is fanciful thought gets into only one step at the definition. The time which is an explanation. No, I'm not just thought at all. Carried out in all three we choose. Shooting between words removing the results when there's no sign that we can search for X's with. Thinking about why since we switch from one to other, they're all processes for the first category. You see unconscious thought is myth, rejecting the state of emphasizing structures by the pessimist trap that cycles, indigenous agency and activism, life between. The state is unchanging instead of decided in this business alliance. So agency overlooking reality, the organization, having a record for shifting state positions, with session traps and human agency activism, that could reimagine relations, market reimagine relations, that kind of one. Firms want to both do the capital 3 compliant and the combination of playing cell links that if it can't solve one is the only aspect of its model. The second is that their models create more hazard that means more fossil fuels are released. No evidence that exists just as you may need to have able to be done. The max is proving cost intervention magnifies our inequality impact because it forces us to go to online and drill those microfilm can't solve only burning or release use vaccines of able access use. No. Condoms, voter, and dispo solves A searches, maximum invoices, group of AKB, fairness ask, can be all against our emergency, contradiction, brings best to see answers, the misconduct, said business, confidence, Smith, likes of 15 folks will take the economy, myth, confidence is one side, bull ball of a handful, people put us to use business platter as much as everyone else, so it says, like, evidence, we keep the lack of correlation between growth and concern, common investments, via renewals, boost investor confidence, statements, when investments, no renewal, lynching, rail, growth, and common investments, boost investor confidence, and accelerate investments, include time for the showing spark, the uptake in human investments, efforts, health fracture, check this 5 COVID adoption, no, firms, spoke who after one bad news cycle they will prioritize those profitable endeavors first. So recession like rate hikes in China, so the alignment TT recession on defense of one plus asset and credit bubbles and promise on low interest rates, so worsening of Chinese housing. The credit bubble would spill over to the global economy. But in the symmetrical goal, 18% of wars had never happened declining. Power spent less than the defense, or less like the difference between we measure power by show GDP among great powers. The curious is to make it appear that it was over in between great powers that investing view decline receives little support aggressive response here. The exception of the this and no, like the plan side and force Sanders, which means it doesn't force money to adopt a tariff, rather provides for a market transition, which means you wouldn't have to force it. But to the warming term, CBAM does not mean that we aren't able to solve warming, only sequestration solves, but the plan also facilitates it globally, which means there would be no unique impact. I will not adopt a CBAM. I will deteriorate means a lot of efforts, whether it's True's cooperation, I call the world, when you lay down details of true tax carbon, I turn to the US KRA for the reason why the administration is slow, so doing so from the ongoing once a lot of efforts, we should do really go off for. We're doing once a lot of efforts. We don't want to do something that pushes people away. Countries committed to rationing up their plans ahead of the meeting and organizing the collective results for the world on track 2, or he makes domestic industries unsustainable. Well, at 21, we know parents we didn't know he would commit to the aggressive company expect to keep them on first days mobilizing and rich shock into the barrage of action sign to send a signal of investors false suicide as they flow really high supplies warned of a drop in supplies they're more fierce than one of folks expect 3 to link it never said to 3 the EPA makes an level war passing stop on Samsung 21 China and opposes the use CBAM idea proceeds to UAE send out expectation Japan has been a public opposing presence for call for the 20 low child good driver risk contain provisions of Valley Depot WTO will show over the restrictions the rain and CFCs and the site span trading the front end will not suspect or jump to WWE dispute trade and quantity disputes exposure to risk which incentivizes aggression on 16 economic independence have achieved war the trade promotes a peace depends on the balance between two nations if symmetrical both but if they engage less conflict more often now the relationship be asymmetrical these circumstances bring conflict with the eyes and depend are 25 times more likely to engage on conflict then to a point trade up for peace over after that the balance becomes disproportionate globalization increases in ideas no interdependence impact 1917 and 1930 was interconnected the year later World War independence is insufficient to overcome conflict makes the assumption that we're conflict will reduce trade.
Go to the counterpoint with the argument that like they aren't able to produce the technology if they don't have the water.
Oh,
and
yeah.
cause the intersectoral speed.
Yes, in order for the thing to be, the counterplan to be implemented, they need the water resources. That's as per the arguments about successful climate. Okay, everything else.
Okay. Reasons to reject the team.
Condo, sorry. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, why does the plan get modeled but not the counter plan?
The citizen evidence is very specific to how the U.S. deployment of BECS would be modeled because we have kind of this unique geographic resources that allow us to kind of show the world how to deploy BECS. The other thing is that BECS is a natural solution that doesn't
Wait.
require like super complex technology, which means like
How is
yes,
carbon
sprinkler
capture
mining.
not complex technology?
Well, relative to the counterplan, right? So this thing where you like
Okay, so
like just
wait, what Evan when he
cover the
sees
ocean
that-
and stuff.
what Evan when he says that the sophistication of the technology is what determines if it gets modeled or not.
That's not the argument. The argument is that there are certain aspects of BECS that allow it to be modeled more easily. I can pull up this.
Okay, what are those aspects?
Yeah, let me pull that up.
Did you scratch the arguments, Gene, and do like the causes intervention?
No.
No.
The citizen evidence says the U.S. able to lead science and engineering, suitable geography for demonstration of early deployment, R&Ds that gender specifically defined,
Why is that unique to CCS and not other geoengineering?
because that's not relevant for suitable geography for demonstration of early deployment, and the U.S. taking the lead in that area. The other thing is like the thing you're talking about. So BECS is just like planting forests, using those forests to create bioenergy, and then sequestering the emissions from the production of bioenergy. That is a much simpler concept, simpler technology than trying to cover the entire ocean with a certain plastic film.
Okay. Sure. We kind of missed the warrants for why the second plank doesn't solve. When you read out music theater.
Yeah.
The second plank.
I think I can shoot it. Let me pull it up. Only varying the releases using CCS. BACS is able to access it. That's the Pierce evidence, the stencil evidence.
Wait, okay, how does CCS solve like methane, nitrous oxide, other emissions beyond carbon?
It's a question of like solving the worst impacts of warming, and which if we remove all carbon from the atmosphere, it does. Methane is kind of a temporary GHG, which means it's not
Okay.
anywhere near the threat of carbon dioxide.
You read Ev on BizCon that says recession is likely from 4 months ago. Where's the recession?
Whereas the recession, it's making a long-term prediction about like structural factors in the economy.
Okay,
Like rate hikes have not come yet, but
Yeah,
they're
that makes
not going to cause a recession.
okay. The Ev 1AC says we're approaching the tipping point. How quickly does the app scale up BECS to solve warming?
How quickly?
Yeah.
It's like the transition to BECS is simple, so it would be quick. Like I can't provide you a time frame because that's impossible now.
Okay,
But there have been like
Sure.
models done, and they say that BECS is the only hope for a state that can scale up quickly enough to solve.
the last argument is that there's not enough water for the counter plan. What Ev says that there's massive sources of water that prevent us from
The
doing this.
1AC talks about how we need to ensure sufficient resources to meet our commitments to the Paris Climate Accord.
Okay, what was the last argument on the advantage cabinet? Something like intervention.
Yeah, in order to get those percolates, the U.S. would have to like invade other countries essentially.
Okay.
6. It should be 7. It'll be the advantage counterclaim, cycle T protection, and then the case page.
Counterclaim set all protection case page. Is that what you said?
Yep. Chris, what are you doing?
I'm good.
MBA?
The government owns the entirety of that one. It does Faraday, which the U.S. alone could give 500 years of emissions through sequestration. So investing in the technology is sufficient to use microbubbles covering 4.8% of latex would do being would reflect enough sunlight, so it would not warm the tool. And it's uninhabitable. Behave the conflict into a lens of sufficiency. If you cannot find an impact or deficit, then you should err negative and vote negative. Not to disadvantage second judge case. The conflict, if you think it looks to the benefit, it will be a logical extension. No conditionality. Now, framing the issue for the entirety of the treaty was it was very blitty. So if you do not have a claim and a warrant with every single argument, you should strike it off your flow. And the one issue should not get to extrapolate and say that 2C dropped it. 2C1, this perm do both, but at least the benefit because it will be an environmental regulation. What you'll do will be the one in our 2AC2 is perm be the conflict of severance. That makes the F a moving target, which is reject the C for deterrence. 2AC3 is the combination. I don't know what this gets them, and it was unwarranted, so I'm not even going to answer. 2AC4 is links to net benefit. The conflict is not a regulation, nor does it do anything that will make businesses upset, but it just invests in technology. The 2AC, the 6 is the global stuff. 1, we don't need it because all of our evidence assumes the U.S. and its borders. But 2, if it is true that your technology is so simplistic, ours is literally mining a rock and covering the ocean in latex, which is so much simpler than anything that has to do with CCS. The next argument is that we need more water. This is not true. This is not true, but I don't really know why this is a deficit because you've not said that water is all going to run out. But independently does not matter because we can do it and we can do it inevitably. But independently it does not cause intervention. I think this was unwarranted. Then you should judge the intervention like if you think it is true. Now, conditionality 1, we get what we did. 1 is negative flexibility. It's here absent generics, which allows for 2 in choice and strategic opportunities because they picked the grounds. 2 is testing ideological, political clash from multiple angles, investor education, community formation. 3, logic and real world. IR must find the best policy blues. But just for me, counterplans doesn't make the plan good. 4, critical thinking rewards smart choice, construction efficiency. Block choice. 5, fallback. 2 is our risk averse having a fallback, loss for innovation. Error negative. 1 is bias, speech order. Infinite prep, fast specificity, focus, and resolution constraints. 2 is inevitable. Speed, small shells, and other after theory. Through checks, add-on tree turns. And then permutations. 4, reasonability. You're not a norm setter. If debate's not a possible no vote on it. And then negative cut dispositionality. No one knows what it is. 2 easy will still constrain the negative. And then worsens the research of balance and race process calculus. Unbeatable. Psycho can see the permutation. Not going to go for it. T. Topo performance was the stop pollutant into the water, not the usage, was the Vaughan evidence in the 1 and C, which is a stable mechanism for the topic. 2AC1 is sweeping in a vacuum project, clinicality 1, it makes us go for substance, and in context 2, it leads to infinite vagueness and teams can just read the resolution. 3, the role of the judge in ballot is to reject clinicality, and the vote for who did the better did anyone in C2. The 2C2 is the function of it. This is not true because the function of the point does not stop pollutants in the water, it's not the usage of water in other intersectionary places. 3rd, context
you've highlighted one SDG. I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know what SDGs have to do with the app at this point, but this is not part of the plan. And it is 1 out of the 14, so it is definitely not reflective of what you do. What happens to the counter to the next argument is the counter duration 1. It links to all number limits offense, which internally turns all of their offense because it keeps an untenable research burden for the negative. In a world where it just has a stop pollution, cease these, or do any sort of mechanism that they're interpolated, that means that the negative must protect not only mechanisms but any sort of pollution with those mechanisms, which triples the topic because we would have to defend different mechanisms, all different mechanisms, and puts 2 structurally behind limits outweighed because we no longer be able to clash have in the pace research. And then text any education, which is the only portable skill we get from the activity. Second is grounded, obviously, any stable link basis because they're all based on regulation. But in a world where you do things like use other mechanisms, all links become untenable. Things politics goes out the door because there are things that Republicans do and don't like depending on what regulation it is. And we lose things like EPA straight up because you can no link the EPA out of a mechanism which shows that we are functionally behind. The impact is fairness in a world where the negative does not have the functional limits on the topic we are structurally behind, and obviously any counterplay competition because it can be any mechanism, which I sort of forgot about. The next argument is AFGROUND. This is factually incorrect. Just reading a card from Hoffman does not mean they're not Fed keywords because the Fed keywords are low-hanging fruit, jurisdiction, and just finding a different format technology or some sort of balloon is the necessity. The next argument is particularly, this is a joke. Your intern is from the Danube, which is obviously not reflective of this topic. So if it's either as bad as ours or even worse, the limits outweigh because it determines the scope of research, even if it's not where we research, which internal interns and everything is about water, so it is irrelevant. Next argument is ground. I did that above. The next argument is just factually incorrect because there are not other words that check things like mechanisms and functional limits. I did above because they're obviated by things like app specificity, recently rejected. And because as Judge Hader mentioned, the T debates are good, necessary, and educational, and there's no right for what is reasonable, but the combination of all reasonable interpretations is unreasonable for the negative case. Oh, wait, actually, one more thing. The app is backwards and antithetical to the topic. They've cut their stencil card backwards. It says BCCS is incompatible with other conclusion of other commodities stencil. And to be very clear that these is the global over higher order stress and regular implementation such as the creed, negative order conversation based on communication how they analyze social organization. First large BCCS and common connection over running. And for the show, universal limitation also means that we meet at any plan argument is a double term itself because the increased protection of water would be to not use BCCS because it is bad for water, so you can better get on presumption. Case. First, go down to 1 and C4, all causes. You cannot just say that CCS can get rid of things like nitrosis, oxide, and methane. It's called carbon storage, not methane storage, MBA dummies. Methane vastly outweighs it as big all called rubber. And 19, methane keepers are climate 25 to warming. And causation low produce emission limited. The short water mistakes bracket. And the thing from gas back leader and methane. The setup that costs people heavier methane. The emission higher than estimate or whatever. And the quote take the computer methane or show explain the emission global because of these naturally take higher. Those are estimates and they conceded things like other countries. India and China must adopt their technology or emissions will completely overwhelm it, and every other emission that is listed at every other sector. This definitively makes the app a drop in the bucket, which they all conceded. Now, go back up to CCS failing. CCS is bad and would not be scalable. First is that they conceded that other countries cannot follow the hazarding evidence. I see that places like Europe do not have CCS projects and do not have financial incentive to do so. They have found zero progress in the past dozens and dozens of years, and quite literally says that it is too complex for them. Nothing in between CCS that makes it any simpler because it's just a whole bunch of scientists that have no idea what the fuck is happening. The hazarding card also said that would not scale up. CCS might be successful in labs, but nowhere necessarily that would be successful in the broader scale of making sure that it can solve for all of climate change. No one has ever thought that it would solve for 1.5 degrees Celsius in an IRL world. They have said it in labs, but lab tests are not reflective of what the technology would actually look like. So there's this unwarranted optimism. Independently, the CCS is net carbon positive. It's grossly inefficient, causes upstream emission pollution, leakages, carbon capture, causes more hardly going to reduce the transfer emission, increase pollution, carbon emission, make a place of the upstream emission, like the emission, capture the level of emission, reduce that, pollution higher than upstream, carbon air, the carbon use, and additional legal carbon capture, never spend a reforestation, natural air, capturing and loading emission, realize, carbon capture, average from your solutions, and it is bunk black, about 23 CCS, carbon capture storage, season average, short work, season, and useless, purchasing climate change and brains, extreme use, political tool for running, green cover turns or political arguments, and CCS less corporation, actually, governments, reliance on negative emissions is a more hazard level, and taking every system, there's no any take out in the notice on the human being will have the no two people there from that city to go down 14 entities, it's more hazard rolling entities, and carbon addictions. Now, the climate scenario one, there's no climate wars. Our evidence says that there's a long internal linkage between climate change, the wars, and launching nukes, which means it definitely does oxidation and the cause of cooperation. In 18, such an argument with a lot of good exaggerations, philosophically, what research really proved that logic and the seriously, what cooperation do that, not to let's target or like the there's conflict. The warming, the climate does not cause extinction. Contrary claims from reliant speculation about unpredictable feedback loops rather than scientific consensus. 20 degrees is not even enough. Or the 20 factor climate change include scarcity disease of ecosystem evidence in this landscape radio see lots of light. Mark the clarify.
Which 616? Let me set the timer real fast.
Alright, stop prep 536. You ready to cross? Yep. Okay, first on the counter plan, let's talk about the Petrobras stuff. What is it and how does it solve warming?
It's a mineral that sucks up carbon. The U.S. has dozens and dozens of areas it can mine. I think it says the U.S., like the Geological Service, found that we have enough perrite in the U.S.
So how does it absorb carbon?
It chemically reacts with the carbon and absorbs it.
Okay.
I don't know
that's
the
fine.
scientific equation.
What apps are topical?
T, apps that stop pollution, things
What?
like ag runoff, like stopping lead from polluting the water. I don't know, like any chemical like PFAS.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, let's talk about the ground stuff. Politics and EPA trade-off. How does our mechanisms they can possibly get a link?
A stable mechanism means that we can find course of how businesses react to regulations.
Stable mechanism. Why is protection of water not sufficient?
Well, protection of water is sort of vague. They're like basically infinite ways
Okay,
to protect water.
Let me ask this a different way. Why is a reduction in pollution uniquely key to access lakes?
Stopping an agriculture company from polluting into pollution is a core question of the topic.
Okay,
Now,
what about stopping use of water? How is that not also a core question?
Well, it doesn't, nowhere like describe it in half.
Not all uses hurt the water, which is the distinction. So you can't predict this.
I mean, hypothetically, not all pollution hurts the water either.
Well, to be a pollutant, it must harm the environment and water.
Not
You're just
true,
wrong.
but,
You're actually not
let's
right.
move on to the ground stuff. What state deficits do you think are like obviously provide you these systems?
Jurisdiction, modeling claims.
Jurisdiction? Okay,
Modeling claims.
and modeling. All right.
There are probably more. Like
That's fine. Let's go to case. Besides methane, what were the all causes you listed?
I think the Kumar card also lists nitrous oxide and like something, maybe something below that. And then it also lists like, we also said India and China, which the 2AC thought can see.
The CFCs.
Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
CFCs.
Okay, oh yeah. Let's talk about the CCS carbon positive stuff. Like what's the word?
The manufacturing of CCS is a process that ends up polluting more carbon than it can take up because it won't be successful. I also think it says it has leakages. So the storage facilities will not be able, the storage capabilities will not be able to keep all the carbon that it sucks up.
Okay, for the counterpart stuff, can you walk me through the second solvency
It
mechanism?
covers 4.8% of the ocean in a
Which
model.
increases albedo, like to what level?
It reflects the Morgan card isolated. It reflects enough sunlight that it wouldn't warm the earth.
What would warm the earth?
The heat, it would reflect the heat. That's how albedo works.
Okay. All right, sorry, let me clear. Does the albedo that you deploy return the albedo of the earth back to where it was?
Yeah, it would reflect it so warming does not lead to the Celsius.
Okay, we'll take prep again. 536. All right, sorry, stop that. We'll only take that.
Okay, it's sent.
I'm just gonna finish the card I was reading this out.
Which card was that?
The board card.
The order will be the advantage, just finishing the card, then the climate trade-off dissent. Let me pull that up. The tariff dissent and then the BISCON dissent.
You say it one more time.
So finishing the card on the case, the climate tariffs dissent, the BISCON dissent. Okay. Okay. Finishing order. Even with 20 degrees Celsius, there would be coastal and elevated regions that would have dignitaries above the 10th threshold that would remain large areas which, so those can continue. This can see no leak and the bites are doing anything in the status quo, there's no offensive. This one. Econ change outweighs its impact filter, slow growth collapses, the rule-based order, greenlanding, Chinese Russian aggression, and unregulated geoengineering, drones, synthetic biology, and tech. That's a birds of and econ decline, causes loose news extinction, man 14, but decline by the egos affect other companies, America's guarantees are obviously for the child, America's status risk, the WMD can change spectrum security, big growth of global finance, factoring if it's prolific funds within, work for terrorist opportunities, so we can American status, turns a case versus terms, warming, token, and 12 promotional issues would be less important during the coming close to delay a fund of energy, or when correct, one of the lower prices would up a issues on the back burner and limit the level of all energy and nuclear war, cause extinction and wreck climate progress. Warden 18, a nuclear strike would unleash the suffering of advances in tech. Devastation would be worse. Food and that people would die reduced voices, horrible vomiting, bleeding, diarrhea, debris, and fire would be everywhere. People would receive 30 burns, break a cycle encompasses the air blast, so people can die, receive injuries, and the one will carry fallout, far and sick others, and the nuclear war would have devastating consequences. Every other planet would die. Experts research shows news to be maybe the mistake, the devastating long-term effects of nuclear war come down to smoke. It would stay for years. That smoke would expand the heat up, blocking out sunlight. Even this one nuclear war could do so much, but the temperatures would fall, shortening growing season, 30 food supply and ag production would drop 40%. Lack of food would drive prices. There would be wars of resources, and we might see nuclear war states trying to seize control over food and water, smoke, floods, by 20 degrees. When the climate change unprecedented precipitation will drop 45%. Nothing would grow and drink. Those who didn't die would die of starvation. The those that would allow UV that would harm every ecosystem, and the link alone turns the case. Regs overburden industries and tech enforcement. The 21 direct policy implications apply requirements will lead to overburden industries instead of our voluntary conservation and weakened regulated entities. And to receive one, BISCON is key to the economy. Otherwise, investors fear the fears prevent growth. That's the market is preferred because they're about New Zealand, not the US. Studies confirm our theory. Business confidence tells economic fortunes better than conventional indicators. Colin 20 BISCON predicted go superior than conventional predictors control user cost output cash flow and stock market rationale for BISCON as cash flow as causal in business cycles. Confidence has significant power for growth and strong ability to determine credit and stock prices. Confidence is key to growth. It's a barometer that foretells the overall health of the economy. Shakar 19 BCI monitor growth and forecast the situation of business sentiment. 14 economy and indicator dodging health. The positive outlook can be healthy for outlook will benefit. Growth BCI will avoid impact currency confidence, increase growth, employment income, entrepreneurs, consumers, Wall Street, purchasing governments are effective, and business confidence drives economic recovery. MM21 business confidence will drive recovery. PMI showing whether businesses expect the economy and business conditions to be favorable or unfavorable. When businesses feel confident they're best government needs to rebuild the economy. But confidence next is the link turn, but the link to it. I'll do it here. Plan imposes various burdens and regulations on every person, every company, apparently in the country that causes uncertainty and backlash for businesses. That's a market evidence. The link will always outweigh the link turn. First is negativity bias. Business cycles assume the worst case scenarios, even if the merits of the regulation are good. That's the market evidence. Two is speed. Businesses react faster than the government can even implement policy. If you think the plan is good, they want to perceive that plan until after they react poorly. Westfall 21, things get ugly in a hurry when investment comes back in the coming fail, even faster than the local consumer minds today. The sophisticated adversary, interlinked corporations, God's van before policymakers want change which they want to take and do that. Embedded lag spending, similar to the stock market, it's in recovery to come back to incorporate this spending can be ominous. 3, the UK's BISCON is high now. Survey CEOs that are optimistic from January. That's it. Low evidence. Only the plan can offset that because there's no impact to get good economy even better because they have not said BISCON is low in status quo. Next, they say no link. Be skeptical. There's no end. We've this is the opposite. The sudden nature of the plan magnifies the impact to uncertainty and uniquely centers business confidence. Macquarie and 16 confidence levels play a key role in risk or several factors to cause market shift to cause market predictably. They're rapid and unexpected unannounced policy shifts in the states about government policy and lack of transparency in the process undermines the economy and results in plain robot that turns the app. I've been in 21 transparency, central bank policy, general business transparency, control some uncertainty for enforcement policies, more uncertain policies, more central policies that layer on custody requirements, conservation, job creation, binding information, how they require greater transparency. It's fundamental to decision making and implement more durable policy. Market card and more durable policy. Next, they say recession coming. There's no recession coming. First, there was 4 months old. MBA thinks it's a structural thing about the economy. It does not. This China's housing market crash was spilled over. It did not. It was 4 months old. And we didn't see an impact. Secondly, it ANZ's policymakers are, we ready, Lockman in 1117, but economic policymakers have no excuse for being unprepared. And 3 about global collapse, are impacts about the US losing competitiveness, which means that the entire global economy collapse, it would not be that bad. Next, they say no impact, yes impact. There have let us quo tension between China and the US. It says countries won't last out when they fall behind, but our stories about China escalating flashpoints when they were ahead, like Taiwan to test use resolve. Decline causes terrorism, civil wars, and diversion that goes global. Nothing checks. Blue and 18, the current landscape, economic crisis, global conflict, current 2008, will bring up to the distress feel on fuel and terrorism and war, during the depression, smooth company, but that can work more worrying view of other factors. What? In view of other factors.
Sorry, my timer's. 5:21, sorry. Stuff from 159. Yeah, I'm gonna send out some cards too. Sorry, we're gonna both send out cards, but you want to put them in the body.
Auto 25. No, it's auto 25.
Yeah. Oh well.
You drew some like 8 cards out of the body of the text when you did this. Brutal. And they're all like long, they're all like hedge and veto sustainability cards. I was like, how do you expect me to scroll through this?
Okay, this one's kind of close. I'm not gonna lie. We have, I don't know what I'm doing. My bad. You didn't like reading DDEF cards on your email? Listening?
Yeah, sorry, my thing would not say. No, hold on. There it is. Okay. Mine's at the top.
Okay. Actors in the dock. Let me know when you'll have that.
I got both.
Okay. Is anyone not good?
I don't have these.
I mean, download it.
Did you give an order?
Yeah, case
I was
T.
net gave them.
I did not get an order.
That
Yeah,
is not
I don't think I
it.
gave
was
one.
not
No, I think
it.
it's my bad. I think it was
Sorry,
my
I'm
bad.
constantly the order person.
I think you're right about
If you was over, I was with you.
case T, the counter plan, the dissent. Is anyone not good?
What's the first one? In the
Case.
docs. It's like,
Oh, the counter plan and then
okay,
the dissent.
sorry. That makes
Sorry.
sense. Obviously, yeah, my bad. Okay.
Anyone not ready?
Yes, Beck solves it's able to be scalable because there's 7 million places of forest where we're able to plant biomass. And they say tests are not reflective. Yes, it's how plants grow. That's how they sequester carbon in their growing. The CCS stuff, it's about CCS probably, not about Bex, which we have specific evidence to that says that it would be able to sequester all carbon emissions. It's not bugged, but that applies to the counterplan. They say methane outweighs. It definitely doesn't. Our evidence says that we're able to meet our goals if we are able to sequester the carbon, which is able to solve the emissions. And that's the story evidence. They say nitrous oxide and other stuff in it's a drop in the bucket, but we're able to meet Paris only if we adopt Bex and adopt it. But every single amount that we stop climate change is good because you have no moral obligation to vote out. Communities in global south and around the world are being put on the back burner. Don't fall for their nuke impacts. They vote on the best drug we have to prevent global suffering, which we have read a card that says we have an ethical obligation to stop climate change, which means you should go for it. But there's also no risk of nuclear war. There's no risk of precision tech ensures that blast or localized industrial low yield nukes ensure that humans survive and limit death. That's Libra and the worst estimates, but it put it at 1 million deaths per firm. Also, scientific instances and assume the worst nuclear war possible. That's Stevenson. There's no risk, but you're also cognitively biased against climate impacts. The no nuke stuff. It doesn't matter because we still access it because of climate change causing worsening economic collapses. The T. Protection is abundance president, damage prevention, restoration, and management. We are that's core of the topic, but we can see that predictability doesn't matter. After that ways topic down, everyone reads the same 5 terrible chaos with the stupid environment impact. This kind of incident steamrolls too many assets just too cowardly to go for it. It's too links for remediation to be it's open because there's no reason water use should be ceased. There's no reason that it's specifically the app. And the state CP is already impressive. If you ask me to now, everyone is terrible. Spillover advantages that lose the advantage kind of plans in politics to try to divert some app innovation authority has to are the best check, but the only management apps give that jurisdiction. The creative to mean that the state's counterplan is able to beat all of their deficits, but jurisdiction's not a deficit because they're able to regulate the pollution that outcomes from that area. They say spending, but it's also not a deficit because they're able to regulate the pollution, which is irrelevant to spending. Theory doesn't solve because 2 ways are too scared to go for it, and they aren't willing to. We don't link to the limit. We don't link to the limit stuff because or they link just as hard. There's an infinite number of ways you can prevent pollution, which means that the mechanisms are inevitable because the apps will just say that their mechanism prevents pollution better, but their interpret results in tiny prevention of pollution apps, which makes it impossible to predict the ground stuff. Politics is by part links don't exist, but it's the same links because we still regulate those companies. Yes, there's functional limits because the state's counterplan is OP, which is a card that we read, and they don't have any response to it.
Answer the last card. That's not what the app does.
Oh.
Implement Bex.
Yeah, the card is not what the app does. We don't implement Bex. We create a management regime, which is what the biologic evidence outlines as tough.
The counterplan. The counterplan calls for the plant source in Kubota. 19. Carbon capture increases air pollution. Upstream emissions or emissions and links from mining transporting a fuel. Jacobson argued the best solution is replacing fossil. Even if carbon capture equipment is able to capture 100% of the carbon and give the cost of manufacturing and running. Makes it less efficient applications result in additional leakage of carbon dioxide. Smarter investment is reforestation and biomass running in. Paradigm is leaky CCS and Esham. 16 weeks when the traditional method of storage by injecting CO2 in sedimentary basins. If it's leakage, we then turn it mineral carbonation and if I go to the drawdown scenario requires Paradise no big old one is also if the first plant continues to release carbon and then things like ice melt and force drives up which drastically reduces the the 1AC counterplan is a very specific amount of geoengineering. This is justified by the new cars that they read and new arguments that they made on the solvency stuff. But there's don't rush kick because it forces the 2AR to defend both worlds, which is an impossible burden for the 2AR. You can't vote negative when the costs are requisite of justice, which is a conceded ethical claim. The loosening stuff is just proven by 08 and COVID, and they don't turn warming because the economy because they aren't able to access the warming impact because the environmental issues are still pertinent when we're able to scale up BECS. But the recession is coming now. Saying that it's not and it's just speculation is not true. There's a logical list converse to the economy. Elliott 1228 competitive growth of the economy. The biggest issues in the agrarian will be a super variant inflation test. Wage per sale was setting inflation about 50% of modest rise would cause a Fed policy in China. Turns out the economists and geopolitics will go like in 2020 to emerging markets garden in dollars. The Fed is taking making it more expensive to serve. That's a question. Rock bottom rates and flooding of markets making it cheap to more money for playing activity. The risk is monetary policy action kicking away the prop supporting richly valued assets. The link doesn't show the case because they're still able to durable fiat means we get the enforcement. All they said is structural stuff doesn't matter, but it does. The link turn, the intersectoral disputes, they've conceded it. That's the Smith and Massachusetts evidence, which says the only way we're able to manage that is by adopting a management regime. Otherwise, those companies aren't able to have their profits, which means that the speed stuff doesn't matter because they aren't able to work if they don't.
4 or 5?
No, 5 is 5 is
5 to 6. fisheries.
The order will be T protection, the disad, the counter plan, and then case. T, disad, counter plan, case. Good, good. Good.
1 second. Oh wait, yeah, I haven't actually done that. Oh, I just did.
This might sound ticky-tacky, but they have conceded a presumption level about if it is true that the app will stop harm to water, and that water will be taken to use for BCCS. They've conceded that BCCS is bad for water, it causes harm and pollutes it, and increases their temperature. They've conceded that it is a double turn with the plant text. So if that is true, the app will take water away from carbon capture storages because they're currently polluting water, which is conceded. They did not see the word presumption on T, nor they just threw off the card, which proves that you can vote negative on presumption. This one. Economic decline always causes war. One is in turns case. One is war. WaRu says that a versus no access tests U.S. resolve causes aggression and miscalculation and nuclear war sickness, loose nukes. The man that necessitates that terrorists would also test U.S. resolve, find vulnerabilities, while the economy and our military and take those nukes in. Wreak havoc. Third is emerging technology, which should act as a tiebreaker if you think that this debate is close. But they conceded that a baby versus things like emerging technology, AI, from overwhelming the world and calling things like killer robots or making humans their enemy. Lastly, is that magnitude and time frame vastly outweigh one. They have conceded that nuclear war causes extinction, it causes the blacks out resources, the sun causes black smoke, it kills everyone, which is the war evidence, and it definitely happens much, much faster, which means the only way they can win this probability, but the dissent will vastly outweigh, so we only have to win a sliver less. Next is that it turns case one, is that it could see environment on the back burner, because recovery means that we'll invest in things like fossil fuel in the military to make sure that we get back in the game, which turns all their ethics arguments and all their environment arguments, which is the token evidence, like as the enforcement goes out the door, the argument was not that you don't get durable veto, but agencies do not have money, and companies will just try their hardest not to comply, nor try to circumvent things like offshoring or investing their money elsewhere to make sure that they can make sure to not comply with the app means that durable veto does not solve the first few arguments. Andrew turns case arguments, the answer that all above, the answer to law does not matter because COVID affected everyone, including terrorist groups, but a U.S. recession would only take us out. The next argument is that the next argument is the next argument is the sort of insecurity stuff, but this does not matter because the ethics argument doesn't matter because it is still unethical to have economic decline. It increases the amount of inequality and is bad for everyone. So most of this was still new in the 1 AR, but independently it will still vastly outweigh feeling your body shut down organ by organ and being burned alive by nuke is still pretty terrible. The next argument is that a recession is coming now. This is not true. One is that interest rates aren't a problem. Carmichael, and then 3 economy is now going to place interest rates appropriate. The economy can handle it. Inflation, interest rates in Ukraine are on the cost, and 225 high expected pressure. Ukraine called it to high global inflation, but not recession market is going to be interest rate market continue. The 2023 confidence is returning late, and then 3 and 4 Omicron proceeding a lot like there's no point to next week. Neighbors likely to do how you continue to opportunity with the market will turn. The consequence of the Ukraine station or prices would end inflation will begin. The result on track Ukraine never said inflation. You don't believe it on confidence. The results here move this way. The headwinds independently, all of these arguments do not matter. They've conceded that BizCon and businesses are the only thing that matters to the economy and will sustain the economy. If that is true, it'll be able to serve as a deterrent to any sort of economic downfall because businesses will still remain confident and continue to invest and then drive the economy forward even after interest rates, which is a thesis located that conceded about the economy and how it functions. The next argument is that lots of uniqueness. You should punish MBA for sandbagging this uniqueness card. The listing a laundry list, straight it off your flow. It was new. Things like COVID and everything else were all not in the 2AC, so you should not even mention them. The next argument is no link. Now imagine you're a manufacturing or agriculture company and all of a sudden the government is like, we're going to take all the water you use because it's bad for the environment and use it for CCS, which is functioning what the app does. They've conceded the Department of Intelligence that companies have negativity bias. If that is true, then those regulations are detriment and they react negatively. In the context, they conceded Westworld that says the subtlety that out of the blue the government decides to take the water, it'd be much, much worse, and they would pull other investments, and the confidence would go down, which proves that there's definitively a link to the app. The next last argument, this is interdisciplinary thing. One is that they have no uniqueness. Conceded the BizCon and Econ is good now, so the resolving this does not matter. Two, in order to link term, you need linkage.
defense when they do not have it, and to play speed and the other things overrun with the advantage counterplan. All of these arguments were new. Strike them off your flow. We did not read the cards. Learn how to flow. Paradite is sufficient because there's enough to resolve 500 years of carbon, which overwhelms any links to its microbubbles, are able to affect albedo, anything else. Albedo, the first argument is that it causes leaks. No, this is not true. This is you all, because the things like mining, the argument that the card makes is about things like fossil fuels for transportation, which is not about the counterplan. The next few cards are not about the app, and it just says this would investigate whether it does leak, does not say it would, which proves that the counterplan definitively solves much better than the app. And there was going to benefit anyways. I don't know if there's a permutation, but nothing's to the benefit. And now the case page 1 is that there's no conflict because there's too long of an internal link. Countries who are more likely to cooperate, which is the environment evidence. This shows that resources are more likely to push people inwards than outwards. Shows that there's no extinction of warming. The current evidence isolates that as hyperbolic, even if there are studies that say climate caused extinction. That is the latter half. It is the end part of the study, but most of them conclude just be kind of independently conceded, or that the threshold is 20 degrees. Lastly, the CCS is not scalable. Just saying that there's land for forest does not mean it is scalable. There's no evidence that says that technology can be built in the next 40 years, nor would it be sufficient for other countries to follow up.
So you have our prep. Does anyone? I think it's.
It was like 2 something.
We'll just go to it.
We can just scroll back the stream, can't we?
It's fine. We'll just go.
Got lost online.
Online, it's just like
Lost
typing it in the
online.
chat.
Take a lot of things for granted. About in person.
You don't wanna play you don't wanna not keep prep when I'm debating. You wanna make sure you're telling my prep.
Well, you hate something. You said this suit like.
Well, you want to get a card dog?
Maybe.
No, but we.
Not quite sure yet. Probably doesn't hurt to get one together.
Are y'all going to dinner?
Yeah, but all of our people, so it's like they want snack before we
Yeah.
go. But I guess we won't be too, let's see, 5:30, 7, yeah, so, yeah. We're planning to do it.
My kids don't. Her kids do, so.
We're about the same.
Yeah, so I'm like, see what they're gonna do.
Yeah, well, 2 of our people don't eat red meat, but I assume that they'll maybe have chicken and toast.
I don't know, I didn't think to send Abby's or Christian because they're not vegetarian. So
Right, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so when we booked the hotel for this, I was like, no, we don't ever stay at the same hotel because we can never afford it. So we'll stay this time, so much I'll stay with your friends and have a travel with them, so we'll book there, and then
I just got in late.
2 days before, they were like, it's because early bird isn't even staying there, can you change our hotel? I'm just like, really? So I did, I just changed it to when it was closer to y'all in case they.
Okay, well,
Just to visit each other.
I think this,
Oh, every time. Every single.
games, Switch, poker.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that poker, yeah. Well, I told the kids, I was like, I will bomb taxi you.
Oh,
Right,
that's
we'll
right.
go
I was
over
gonna
to
say,
them.
I'll get taxi
Um,
whatever it
We
is.
got within 5 minutes of y'all,
Oh,
so
sweet, okay.
he has like, we'll do it, and then ended up getting me points,
Cool.
so it all works out.
All right. Yeah, I probably had a lot. I think one of mine expired.
Yeah, that was bad, that was
No.
hard for us too.
Okay, the order is the advantage, T, the counter plan, the disad. Is anyone?
1 second.
Yeah. Okay. Alright.
There's a clean ballot for voting math on three different arguments to combine into a ballot. First is that extinction impacts come first, which was conceded on the impact that both teams agreed to. Also, when June says that magnitude is something you should evaluate impacts on, then this means that we are going to win a definitive battle on magnitude. Second is that the plan is the only way to solve warming that the counter plan can't solve, which I'll get to in a minute. The third argument is that warming is the only existential impact because nuclear war is small scale compared to warming and will not trigger the impacts he talks about. That amounts to a very simple half ballot on magnitude. But if you don't buy that, there's a clean ballot on the decision rule that was flat dropped in this debate. Climate change is a unique impact because it is the result of policies in developed countries, but affects developing countries the worst. As developed countries pollute, they consume more. We deprive resources and things like food and water to these developing countries. This means it's a justice issue that should be prioritized. If you think these the case impacts and the dissent impacts are just kind of wishy-washy, there's no clean ballot, then there's a clear ballot on this because you should not vote for an unjust policy. The defense stuff, I'll do it now. We'll concede no conflict. That won't be an argument for warming, but there's multiple drop extinction areas. First is lethal heat. Accelerating runaway warming will cause warming to reach 12 degrees, which makes it 12 degrees warming, which makes it literally impossible for humans to live because it kills us through lethal heat. Second is that the biosphere collapse has as a result of worse natural disasters, which do a 1-2 punch against ecosystems. Ecosystems can survive one natural disaster, but they are not evolved or designed to survive two at once, which is what our Correva evidence specifies as the existential impact for warming. We cannot survive without nature, which means we survive. Care or their impact defense does not account for these things, which means you should apply that. Yes, it is scalable. Our argument says that our evidence says there is enough of disrupted forests for us to plant trees and scale bioenergy and carbon capture sequestration quickly, which is what other evidence doesn't account for. Also, technology is improving, which means that you should take into account forecasts, not things about today. There is a difference between plant solvency and internal links on an advantage. The app implements an adaptive water management regime to ensure there are sufficient water resources to grow the kind of forests and other bioenergy sources we are talking about, which does not mean that we fiat the creation of these does not mean that the plan creates the bioenergy forces in the hopes that it protects water, but that we protect water to ensure we can plant those forests. That distinction is everything because this is a violation to the internal link, not the plan. The plan protects water through adapting water law, which was what and managing water, which is our argument. The counterplan. So you does not understand how CCS works. Our evidence says that, their evidence says that the 2NC Kubota evidence says that CCS fails for three reasons. First of all, is leaks from the minerals when we inject carbon into the minerals. The second argument is that the transportation of things like the petrodite and the petrodite will cause pollution. The third argument is that the plants that actually do the CCS release natural gas. Now, the second card we read in the 1AR was not a reason why CCS is leaky. Is the argument that CCS is petrodite. When they say that they sequester carbon, they mean that they use petrodite to combine the two things and create carbon, which is what their Kubota evidence is talking about. But the Kubota evidence concludes by saying that the affirmative mechanism of afforestation and then burning biomass is the best method, which means it concedes we solve warming and they do not. It is the best solvency card you can find, and they read it for us. But the albedo stuff cannot solve. If the counterplan increases emissions, but the second plank that increases the albedo of the earth does not solve because that plank does not account for it. It only accounts for sequestering current CO2, but does not account for the increase in emissions that happens as a result of the counterplan. It doesn't matter if we are less probable because we have a much bigger magnitude impact, which they have conceded is the way you should evaluate impacts. But I'll answer the impacts first. First of all is No, nuclear war does not cause extinction. No nuclear war you're voting after. You can see that there's no impact that this had. A couple of conceded cards make this argument. Well, first is Lieber. Newest technology means that nuclear wars do not cause extinction. The radiation doesn't develop because it's a low-yield precision nuclear weapon. Second is Stevie. And the worst estimates say there is no impact. As soon as NATO, Russia's arsenal show that there's no impact to a nuclear war. It doesn't cause mass cause. Their only warrant was black carbon, but it does not happen if it's low-yield nuclear weapons. Which means it takes out our first two impacts. The third impact of emerging technology, there was no existential claim in any speech, which means it doesn't apply. It doesn't turn case. It doesn't put environmental back order because it doesn't prevent implementation of facts. Now, the uniqueness question goes ab. Interest rates are going to be raised now, which is what our evidence to take into account. That will crash the economy because it reduces investment. If you have to pay more money on your interest and loans, that means you cannot make the investments with the what he's talking about. The business confidence is only good if you can make investments. But their evidence they have read is not applicable. For the first card is about Great Britain. Obviously, it doesn't apply. The second card says that they will raise interest rates, which our card says crashes business confidence. And the third card doesn't even mention interest rates, and it to the extent that it does not mention it, does not answer the warrants that is warrant or evidence in the.
That was
That was really awkward. That was really awkward.
tough to
That was
watch.
really awkward. I'm not gonna lie. That was caught on camera. That's embarrassing.
I would retire after that.